a woman forgotten by people but never forgotten by God. In her deepest pain and loneliness, she encountered the Lord in the desert, the God who saw her tears, heard her cries, and gave her hope. This is the full Bible story of Hagar. Chapter 1. The servant in Sarah's household. Hagar's story begins in the great household of Abram and Sarai, long before she ever cried out to God in the desert. She was an Egyptian servant, likely brought into Abram's household during his time in Egypt. In that world, servants had little voice. Their lives were shaped by the choices of their masters, not their own. Hagar was one such woman, living quietly in the background, tending to daily chores, unnoticed in the grand plans of Abram and Sarai. But her quiet life was about to be shattered. God had promised Abram that he would be the father of a great nation, his descendants as numerous as the stars. Yet Sarai, his wife, was barren. Year after year she waited. She hoped. She prayed. Each month brought disappointment. The ache in her heart grew heavier with time. Her barrenness became not just a private sorrow, but a source of shame in a culture that prized motherhood. Finally, in desperation, Sarai devised a plan. According to the customs of the time, if a wife could not have children, she could give her maidservant to her husband. The child born from this union would be considered the wife's child. Though painful, Sarai thought this was the only way God's promise could be fulfilled. So she went to Abram and said, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram, weary from years of waiting for God's promise, agreed. And so Hagar, the servant, was drawn into a plan not of her making. She had no say in the matter. Her body, her future, her identity, all were placed in service to the desires of others. She became Abram's wife in name, though without choice. And soon, she conceived. For the first time in her life, Hagar held a position of importance. She carried Abram's child, the heir Sarai never could. But with her pregnancy came pride. She began to look at her mistress differently. No longer was Sarai the honored wife, but a barren woman. And Sarai noticed the shift. Jealousy flared. Resentment filled the tent. Sarai, who once thought Hagar was the solution, now saw her as a bitter reminder of her pain. Anger boiled within her, and she turned to Abram. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram, unwilling to step into the conflict, replied, "Your servant is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best." And so Sarai mistreated Hagar. The details are left unspoken, but the weight of the words tells us it was harsh enough to break her spirit. Words of scorn, added burdens, cruel treatment. Whatever it was, it drove Hagar to the edge. Finally, she fled. Pregnant and alone, she left the camp and wandered into the wilderness. Each step away was a cry of desperation. She had no plan, no home to return to, and no protection. Vulnerable and heavy with child, she walked into the barren desert. Her feet blistered, her lips cracked with thirst, her mind swirled with fear. What would become of her? Would her child survive? Would she be remembered by anyone? In the silence of the desert, Hagar became invisible to the world, but not to God. Chapter 2. Encounter with the God who sees. The desert stretched endlessly before Hagar. The heat shimmered on the horizon, the sand burned beneath her feet, and every breath felt heavier than the last. Alone and pregnant, she wandered into the wilderness with no clear destination. Fear clawed at her heart. She was an Egyptian servant, a foreigner in a land not her own, with no family to turn to. In her mind, she was invisible. just another broken woman cast aside by those in power. Her steps slowed as her strength drained away. At last, she found herself near a spring of water on the road to Shur, the pathway that led back toward her homeland of Egypt. She sat there, exhausted. The cool trickle of water offered temporary relief, but her heart still ached with despair. She was running from cruelty. But what future awaited her? Would she die in the wilderness? Would her unborn child die with her? And then, suddenly, gloriously, something happened that changed everything. At that lonely spring, the angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar. Not just a vision, not a passing dream, but the very presence of God's messenger. The desert, once silent, now echoed with a voice that knew her name. Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? Hagar froze. The question pierced her heart. How could this stranger know her name? How could he know her identity? No one had ever addressed her with such care before. Not Abram, not Sarai. She had always been the servant, the one whose life was controlled by others. Yet here, in the middle of the wilderness, someone spoke her name with tenderness. Tears welled in her eyes. With honesty, she replied, "I am running away from my mistress Sarai." Her answer revealed more than her situation. It revealed her soul. She was a runaway, fleeing pain and humiliation, yet unsure where she was going. She was caught between bondage and uncertainty, between cruelty and death. She had no plan, only desperation. But the angel of the Lord did not rebuke her for running. Instead, he gave her both an instruction and a promise. Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The words must have struck her heart like a heavy stone. Go back? Return to the one who mistreated her? How could she face Sarai again? Yet the command was followed by something far greater, an extraordinary promise that transformed her despair into hope. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. Hagar gasped. Could this be true? She was not only carrying Abram's child, but God himself promised that her child would father a multitude. The angel continued with a prophecy. You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Every word rang with divine authority. Her unborn son already had a name given by heaven itself, Ishmael, which means God hears. The very name was a testimony that God had heard her cries, her suffering, her misery. Though the prophecy foretold a turbulent future for Ishmael, it was still a promise of life, a promise of legacy. For the first time, Hagar felt seen, truly seen. In the house of Abram and Sarai, she was invisible, a servant, a tool, a womb to fulfill someone else's dream. But here in the desert, the God of heaven had called her by name, heard her cries, and given her a promise. Overwhelmed, Hagar's heart overflowed with awe. She gave the Lord a name, el-roi, meaning the God who sees me. With trembling voice she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That moment was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Imagine, a poor servant woman, despised and mistreated, now standing in the presence of God's messenger, declaring the name of God himself. In a culture where servants were ignored, women overlooked, and foreigners despised, Hagar, an Egyptian slave, became the first person in Scripture to name God. The well where this encounter took place was given a special name, Bir Lahai Roi, meaning the well of the living one who sees me. For generations, it would stand as a testimony of God's compassion toward the broken, the unseen, and the forgotten. Strengthened and comforted, Hagar rose from the spring with new courage. She turned her steps back toward Abram's camp. Though the path was hard, she was no longer the same. She carried not only a child, but also a promise from God. Months passed, and in time, Hagar gave birth to a son. Just as the angel had said, Abram named him Ishmael. The boy grew under Abram's care, a constant reminder of God's promise and Hagar's encounter with el-roi. But for Hagar, the memory of that desert spring never faded. In her darkest hour, when she thought she was forgotten, the God of the universe had stooped low to whisper her name. She would never again believe that she was unseen. Hagar's encounter with God in the wilderness became a story not only of survival, but also of identity. She discovered that even in suffering, God sees. Even in exile, God hears. Even in despair, God promises. This chapter of her life ended not with bitterness, but with hope, a hope that sustained her in the years to come, as she raised Ishmael in the shadow of Abram's household. Chapter 3. The struggle in Abraham's household. The years passed. Hagar had returned to Abram's household, carrying within her the promise of el-roi, the God who saw her. Ishmael, her son, grew strong and lively, a boy full of energy, laughter, and questions. Every time she whispered his name, Ishmael, she remembered that God had heard her cries in the desert. But life in Abram's camp was far from peaceful. Sarai, though she had once orchestrated the plan for Hagar to bear Abram's child, now looked at Ishmael with bitterness. Each time she saw the boy running through the tents, she was reminded of her own barrenness. For years, the tension between the two women simmered quietly, like embers under the ashes, waiting for the wind to stir them into flame. Then the impossible happened. The Lord visited Sarah. Her name now changed along with Abraham's, and gave her what she had longed for all her life. At an age when women no longer bore children, Sarah conceived. The camp buzzed with awe and laughter at the miracle. When Isaac was born, Abraham's joy overflowed. He held the newborn in his arms, the son of promise, the one through whom God's covenant would be fulfilled. For Sarah, the birth of Isaac was not only joy, but vindication. She declared, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." She finally had her own child, her own heir, her own place as mother of Abraham's legacy. Yet the birth of Isaac did not erase the presence of Ishmael. Instead, it deepened the conflict. Ishmael, now a teenager, watched as attention shifted from him to the new infant. Once he was Abraham's only son, the apple of his father's eye. Now he was overshadowed by the miracle child. The household, once strained, grew divided. The turning point came during a great feast Abraham held to celebrate Isaac's weaning. It was a day of joy and laughter, but also of tension. Guests gathered, music played, and food was plentiful. In the midst of it all, Sarah's sharp eyes fell on Ishmael. She saw him mocking, perhaps teasing Isaac in the way older brothers often do. To Sarah, it was not harmless play, but a threat. A reminder that Ishmael, the son of the servant woman, could one day challenge Isaac's inheritance. Her fury ignited. She turned to Abraham with a demand that would change everything. "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The words cut deep. To Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael were obstacles, reminders of past failures, rivals to her own son's future. She wanted them gone, cast out of the household entirely. But Abraham was torn. Ishmael was his son too, flesh of his flesh, his firstborn. The thought of sending him away filled Abraham with anguish. How could he abandon the boy he had raised, the boy he had loved? The conflict within his heart was almost unbearable. That night, Abraham wrestled with the decision. Then God spoke to him, bringing clarity in the midst of his pain. Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." The words carried both sorrow and hope. Ishmael would not be Abraham's heir. That role belonged to Isaac, the son of promise. Yet God had not forgotten Ishmael. Just as he had promised Hagar in the desert years before, he would bless Ishmael and make him into a nation.